So first of all, just quickly, as you came in, you were handed a very short survey. Those of you who are used to our events know it, but if you wouldn't mind filling this out at the end of the night and handing it back, that would be great. It really helps us with advanced planning and reporting for our supporters, the Sequoia Healthcare District, the Sequoia Union High School District, and as always, the MAPTA. So let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Heidi Kasevich, PhD, is the former Director of Education at Quiet Schools Network, a nationwide program that focuses on guiding school communities to cultivate inclusive cultures where all temperaments can thrive. Dr. Kasevich partners with both public and independent schools to foster inclusive teaching and learning communities that leverage the strengths of introverts and extroverts. Dr. Kasevich is the author of The Guide to Giving, a highly acclaimed philanthropy curriculum, and founder of Closing the Gap, a sought-after leadership curriculum for aspiring women leaders. Her proficiency is grounded in 25 years of experience as an educator at Nightingale Bamford, where she also served as History Department Chair, Dalton, Berkeley Carroll, NYU, and Cooper Union. Committed to expanding students' perspectives, Kasevich has served as director of the Académie de Paris and Oxford Academic Program. She received her BA from Haverford and her master's degree and PhD from New York University. Please join me in a really warm welcome for Dr. Heidi Kasevich.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here. I hope we can just spend the next hour or so exploring a topic dear to my heart, quiet kids. And I welcome your stories, your thoughts at the end, and I will do my best to kind of create what I like to do for all the kids with whom I work, kind of a safe, holding place where together we can explore ourselves, others, and ultimately do what I like to do best, which is help school communities to build cultures of kindness. So I'd like to start by having you just take a look at this image. When I do work with educators, we often behold this image for several minutes, take it in, and I often ask the question, so which child's more introverted? Which child is more extroverted? And then look at what is on that educator's plate. Look at all those different things that are going on in that one little space. And bottom line is, we really don't know from the image, but we make mental associations. And we tend to see engagement, participation, with the hands going up. And we tend to make that association and make that leap that the child with the hand up is more engaged. Not necessarily true. And again, I just want to start there with that idea that there's so much going on. And if we want to really broaden our notions of participation to engagement, we have a lot on our plates. So from hundreds of interviews with students and teachers, I have found that introverts of all ages feel misjudged, overlooked, undervalued in our schools today, really across the nation. We often define participation as quantity of speech, and assign a grade to the number of times kids raise their hands in our classes. Often, a teacher pauses just 1 second before calling on students. Those who process information quickly are at an advantage under these conditions, and research shows that talkative people have been rated as smarter, better looking, more interesting, and more desirable as friends. A person's actual influence is often overlooked for airtime, the amount of time they spend speaking. Our schools tend to be crowded, noisy places where the walls have come down, so that it can be hard to find a place for privacy. There is an expectation for constant social interaction as collaboration and group work dominate our teaching and learning experiences. As one of my students said, you're always expected to be doing something or going somewhere, and you're discouraged from spending time alone. In fact, 41% of public school teachers leave the profession within 5 years of entering it, a statistic associated with an emphasis on constant social interaction. Studies show that there is an enduring and strong cultural bias towards dynamic, gregarious, and alpha leaders. Susan Cain, in Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, connects the so-called extrovert ideal, charming, charismatic, outgoing, action-oriented personalities, to the rise of the industrial and media ages, which have made it seem as though you can't succeed in life unless you are a fast-talking salesman. The so-called halo effect ensures that extroverted leaders, giving orders, delivering rousing speeches, and loving the spotlight, are often perceived as more effective because they fit the stereotype of a successful leader in 21st century America. To echo one of the words, or some of the words of one of my quieter students in a leadership program at the Hotchkiss School that I co-direct in the summer times, the world becomes a terrifying place when you feel as though you don't fit in. Self-monitoring, or acting out of character as a pseudo-extrovert to the point of self-negation, can lead to severe health problems, including anxiety and compromised immune functioning. Adolescents are particularly at risk for compromising authenticity for the sake of social status. Now, during all of my years as classroom history teacher and leadership teacher at schools in New York City, I used to begin by telling students that I spent my entire middle and high school years with the fear of speaking up in class. I was told repeatedly to just come out of my shell. And sometimes I even used to share a story about my own dread of the mandatory Halloween party, which was very stimulating for me, and my rebellion against the entire experience. Here I am, come out of your shell. This was my little rebellion. I'll give you a little window into my soul here. My little rebellion when my mother took out the pattern, the old-fashioned pattern, McCall's, I don't know, the sewing patterns, and said, "Darling, can I make you the princess costume?" And I said, "No, I want to be a Puritan." And this was my mini rebellion, and I see it now. Mandated fun was not fun, and I really did find the whole thing really overstimulating. But I did live with that come out of your shell. I think as so many of our children still do today. So it's become my mission as an educator, and always actually was, to reach the quiet ones, drawing them out slowly but surely, honoring their strengths. It was never quantity of speech that mattered, but always quality. So I've really worked tirelessly over the past 3 years to train quiet ambassadors to create temperament-inclusive cultures. So what does that mean? An inclusive classroom is characterized by a balance between collaborative learning and independent work, group work, and solitude. It does prize quality over quantity of speech, deep listening, reflective pauses, and writing as varied forms of classroom engagement. By embracing broader ideas of classroom engagements, educators can create opportunities for both silence and speech in the context of any lesson. The goal is I could think of it as a silence talk continuum, with silence as a container of meaning and a constant toggling back and forth between the speech and the solitude and the speech. And by the way, that solitude take all sorts of forms, can be as short as 3 seconds of wait time before a teacher calls on a student, to as long as 15 minutes to get into the creative state of flow with, going back to that first image, just 3 to 4 minutes of beholding an equation, an image, a line, so that we can start to see it from multiple perspectives. And ultimately, as I alluded to with that first photograph, develop empathy. Wow, that educator's dealing with a lot of different personalities in one room. So before we get on to delving into what I call the strength, stretch, restore method, I just want to kind of review, develop a common language about introversion and extroversion, considered to be the north and south of temperament, about 40 to 50% heritable, and accounts for about half of our identities. I'm going to define introversion and extroversion based on a groundbreaking study by Susan Cain's Quiet Revolution and UPenn's Scott Barry Kaufman, who teamed up to develop an introversion-extroversion assessment that focuses on 2 key elements of our biogenetic natures: our sensitivity to stimulation and our sensitivity to rewards, and the preferences that emerge from our neurobiology. And I think in our work of understanding, as I said, self and other through the lens of temperament, building self-awareness, we need to start here. So sensitivity to stimulation. Introversion and extroversion fundamentally has to do with our sensitivity to input from the outside world. Introverts feel most happy and alive in calm, quieter settings, and show a sensitivity to social and sensory stimuli. Coffee, a loud bang, the dull roar of a networking event. Introverts find strength in solitude. Now I have an image here of the birthday party. And I encourage you to think about, what do you want to do for your next birthday? Often this can be kind of the litmus test of your own sensitivity to stimulation. And we can look back at babies as young as 4 months of age and check their sensitivity to the environment by watching their reactivity to a mobile sway, to balloons popping. There is a sort of a reactivity with thrashing and arms waving and crying. That high reactivity can then be traced to kind of later on a fear of novelty, fear of the stimulation of something like a birthday party with clowns. Gotta have clowns, loud people around, and longitudinal studies show that those who are highly reactive to the social and sensory stimuli then turn into sort of quieter adults. So think about, even with your own children, or again, your own self, what's my birthday party? What does my future party look like? And then honestly, maybe perhaps like, what was my worst birthday memory? This is something, as I did with that first image, this can generate a good 45-minute conversation amongst educators, even amongst kids. And I have to say that I am totally guilty of hosting birthday parties for, well, really one I can think of, when my own son, quiet, introverted child that he was, had probably the worst birthday party ever, and I thought it was going to be the most fantastic thing for him. He hid under the table. I think it was age 3. All right, so preferences that emerge, and this is really, really important stuff. So based on our sensitivity, social and sensory stimuli, we have 3 different styles that emerge. So recharging. The introvert will say, I need to spend time alone after team events or socializing. The extrovert, I'm exhausted. What shall we do together after school? The working style. Introvert, I do my best work in solitude. I'm one of the first to claim a copy in the library. For the extrovert, I need background noise or people nearby to get my best work done. In social style, this is very important. For the introvert, I prefer small gatherings and one-on-one communications and social styles. For the extrovert, I thrive on group work and meeting new people. If you think about that spectrum in the classroom, that's a lot of differences there to accommodate. So again, my work with educators, try and open up different modalities for the recharging, for the socializing, for the working. Not a one-size-fits-all environment. Next, sensitivity to rewards. So introversion, extroversion also has to do with our sensitivity to rewards in the environment, which is connected to the neurotransmitter dopamine in our brains, the reward chemical released in response to anticipated pleasures. So the dopamine pathway is more active in the brains of extroverts than in introverts, who feel more energized, a kind of a bubbly buzz, at the expectations of a reward, such as winning a medal in a track race, getting your name in the school newspaper, or making friends with a stranger in the cafeteria. Along these lines, some researchers have suggested that extroversion represents a high-intensity strategy for gaining social attention. So the styles connected with the sensitivity to rewards in the environment. So the communication style, the introvert, I prefer to think before I speak. Please don't call on me. For the extrovert, I process my ideas out loud. I'm usually one of the first to raise my hand. There's that bubbly buzz, that social attention. The hand goes up. And for the risk-taking decision-making styles, for the introvert, I look before I leap. I weigh options before making decisions. And for the extrovert, heading towards the reward, just do it. I'm action-oriented. So armed with this information, this is one of the places where we always begin. Let's break down negative associations that our minds often make when we hear the word introvert. And these are the kind of the 3 top mental associations: shy, antisocial, loner. So shyness is a fear of social judgment. Introverts and extroverts can both be shy. Antisocial is a different social style. The one-on-one for the introvert, the larger group for the extrovert. Loner, not necessarily. No, comfortable in solitude for the introvert, drawing energy from solitude, enjoying and frankly, needing the quiet time for recharging. The body as a battery, the energy can drain, the recharging needs to occur in solitude, in quiet settings for the introvert. Very, very important. Particularly after that was a very stimulating day, as I mentioned earlier, which is the school day. So also, given what I said about the extrovert ideal and our environments that oftentimes are skewed towards the extrovert, kind of honestly without us even knowing it sometimes, I think it's really important to begin by connecting our neurobiology with strengths. And in all of my work in developing quiet leaders, this is where I start. And this is going to form kind of the first of a strength, stretch, restore approach that I have kind of worked to develop, and is the approach that I would highly recommend in working with quieter kids, quieter colleagues, if need be, and really empowering quieter, folks, kids, friends, partners, to really own their leadership style. So starting with strengths. So back in 2014, Quiet Revolution did a really interesting study with the Values in Action Institute and revealed that there are correlations between temperament and character strengths, of which there are 24 according to positive psychology. And I want to add that we have greater and lesser strengths. And this trio that I'm about to discuss, humility, perspective, and prudence, can be learned, practiced, and cultivated by anyone. And together, as character strengths, they form the basis of quiet leadership. I can't emphasize enough that when kids kind of gather together and we talk about developing their leadership skills, because so often those who fall on the introverted side of the spectrum, and again, I think you see that it's pretty complicated given those 5 different preferences we went over. But if they fall on the introverted side of the spectrum, they often think, I cannot be a leader. Yes, you can. You have a certain style that you bring naturally to leadership. So I want to delve into these 3 character strengths that this study showed correlate with the introverted biogenetic temperament. And by the way, there are extrovert character strengths too. They are zest, optimism, social intelligence. And I don't want to kind of leave the extroverts behind, but I do want to delve into these 3. So I want to start with humility. So humility studies show, even amongst middle schoolers, has come to be seen as a sign of weakness, a lacking in self-esteem, when in fact, the humble ego is an indication of a very healthy self-esteem, one that acknowledges one's own limitations, yet has a firm sense of self-worth and value. I love this expression, transcending the self without losing the self. I recognize my weaknesses, I am eager to improve and appreciative of others' strengths. I don't have all the answers. Give me some feedback. And think about the student mentality. Let me quiz myself because I'm not sure that I am right and want to check my understanding. A humble leader also highlights the team's achievements, prioritizing the team and the team's success over their own. As Adam Grant states when teams have a culture of humility, everyone takes ownership and no one is above doing what the team needs. As former Senior Vice President of People Operations, Laszlo Block, decreed, humility is what I'm looking for in new hires because humble leaders enable team members to feel included, which is a direct link to innovation. And I have to add, there was a recent Wall Street Journal article from October the 9th entitled, "The Best Bosses Are Humble Bosses," and notes that some employers are turning to humility to yield better results. I'm pretty excited about a 2019 pending Hogan Assessment study that will be kind of a new personality assessment that will be able to measure humility. It's actually a combination of humility and honesty. I like to talk about Carla Overbeck when I think about a humble elite captain. She goes back to the 1990s. She was dubbed an elite captain by Sam Walker in captain's class. She led the U.S. women's national soccer team to 2 victories, 2 World Cup victories into the Olympics. And she was known for her bag-schlepping humility. She scored only 7 goals. She was a defender, but she served others by carrying their bags in the airport, by serving them water. And she was, and I love this term, a charismatic connector with that one-on-one style. The classic humble leader. This is how the engine of the team did it. And listening and observing were her strengths, which leads to the second of this trio of character strengths, perspective taking. Listening and observing, getting into someone else's shoes by listening. So, t-shirts. Adam Grant from Wharton, I mentioned him earlier. As it turns out, groups of college kids, when they're placed on teams, the team with the listener at the helm can fold more t-shirts if you have the listener at the helm than other teams if you have active, kind of proactive team members. Why? Because the team member just might have a great idea about how to fold as many t-shirts as possible in, I forget, it was like 2 minutes. But I love this study. It's really actually fun to do with kids. But listening builds trust, enables us to acquire useful information and see others as potential allies, to quote Amy Cuddy, and to develop solutions together because everyone feels as though they have been heard. Active listening, not passive at all. And the paradox is not passive at all. The paradox of active listening is that by appearing to relinquish power, we actually become more powerful. And I would just add that this form of silent communication, think about that silence talk continuum, the silence, the energizing silence of a listener is just that, incredibly energizing. I'm quoting Pat Waters, former HR leader at LinkedIn. One person giving positive reinforcement through body language, that silent listening, and letting the person know that you're present by listening with that body language can be just that energizing. You should say, sometimes I show up at meetings and I plan to communicate just with my body presence, powerful, energizing, engaging. And listening is connected, in my mind, with prudence. So thinking before acting, thinking before speaking, Prudence, and here's a very famously prudent investor, introverted investor. Prudence, prudence in my mind has taken on negative connotations as being the quality of someone who really is reluctant, holds back, does not make decisions. In fact, I see some of my work with kids, want them to regain their enthusiasm about being prudent. I'm quietly prudent. I am weighing options before making decisions. As Warren Buffett once said, success in investing does not correlate with IQ. Once you have ordinary intelligence, what you need is the temperament to control the urges that get other people into trouble in investing. His advice: don't take big risks looking for big rewards. Be patient. So here are what some we call strength-based narratives or comments, anecdotal comments, can look like when we take an understanding of quiet character strengths to our own work with students. So an understanding of deliberation. Again, we're moving away from that vector of quantity of speech, from silence to talk. We're honoring the deliberation of the more introverted student, the active listening, the perspective taking, which builds empathy. And my favorite, I have to say my favorite comment is the third one. Betrays, I think, a great sensitivity and understanding of the introverted temperament in class. Setting the tone, like generosity of spirit, seriousness of purpose. And then there's the touch of humor. I fundamentally believe that a quiet revolution in education is rooted in the power of words in our language. So just as we're recrafting what's shy, or reframing the negative language of shy, antisocial loner, we're rewriting the narratives. We're getting away from just speak up, come out of your shell. And, again, honoring that listening, that prudence, that deliberation. So I want to move on from the strengths to the stretches. It's a reminder that the strength, the stretch, the restore. So in all of my work in developing quiet leaders, we start with the strengths, but then emphasize that we are more than our biogenetic natures, right? That we can and we do stretch and flex and take risks and step outside of our comfort zones. And I like to think, I use that image of a rubber band stretching, that we can flex. And we need to do it, and this is so critical in all of my work with kids. We want to do it in a way that is comfortable, not anxiety-provoking or overly anxiety-provoking or overly stressful. So think about stretching in that kind of middle range. If you think of a rubber band literally, you don't want to pull it so far that it will snap. You want it kind of in that middle stretching zone. As Brian Little out of Cambridge University says, we can and we do exercise free traits. And we often do it in the name of our core personal projects or projects in our lives that matter to us. The critical piece is that if we want to have this joy that can come from stretching, we want our projects to be both meaningful and manageable. Meaningful and manageable. So what does that mean? And how can we, as parents and caregivers and educators, scaffold a kind of meaningful stretching for our kids? So I'm going to share what I think is one of the most critical of strategies, the long runway. So the long runway refers to the extended amount of time that it takes an introvert to warm up to a new situation and to participate in a new experience on her terms. So we do want to be attentive to the neurobiological fact that an overstimulated introvert will retreat to the sidelines and where the avoidance impulse can take over the approach instinct. So we want to provide a long runway when we are kind of helping our young introverts to stretch, to step outside of their comfort zones. So what does that mean? To go back to that birthday party. So the birthday party, overstimulating experience, imagine the clowns and the people and the noise and the bright lights, potentially. We want to preview that experience for our introverts, and frankly, introverts of all ages. We want to discuss, this is what's going to happen. Arriving early is critical. With educators, agendas in advance. Even for adults in meetings, agendas in advance. Let the third to a half of your students, the third to a half of us are more introverted and more extroverted. Let them know what's happening. It provides that kind of comfort, that long runway. And I want to emphasize this arriving early is really important. And an exit strategy. Sometimes we refer to this as the Irish exit. We're going to stay 15 minutes, 20 minutes, going to be able to go. But we're going to show up. We can leave when you're ready and when you need to go. But let's try showing up. And you as the parent, the caregiver, this can be very tricky business to kind of figure out, okay, is it time to, is my child ready to go to that birthday party? And that's, I often say it might be, it might not, but it could be. You have to kind of figure that out in connection with your child. It might not be this Saturday's party, it might be next Saturday's party, kind of giving that long runway. So again, the child can feel more comfortable and feel that it's a stretch within that 4 to 6 range. When in doubt, keep your child with the bridge friend. Often that kind of a close intimate with whom they feel comfortable. So let's go with, your best friend. I talked earlier about that kind of that one-on-one social style. We often see a very kind of a close companion or two in an introvert's life. And we say, when in doubt, that friend can help bridge that gap between kind of the, what's familiar and that new experience, and that new experience could turn into, something that you'll never ever want to stop doing again, but you have to go out and try. And, we're often exposing our kids to different activities and helping them to try and uncover their passions. But sometimes we just have to get them out the door, and the bridge friend can be critical. I just want to shift here quickly to adults. Sometimes the adults who fall on the more introverted side of the spectrum also really don't want to go to something like a networking event. It's just not something that they're going to look forward to. The bridge friends concept still works. You know, I often say to kind of the introverted adult, grab an extrovert and head off to the networking events. And that can really be, as long as you're kind of working together, you can kind of, show up together and kind of, work the room, know that you're going to leave after 45 minutes, and it's all good. It's better to kind of get there than not. And before I move on to the concept of restoring, focus in on what is often the most challenging of stretches for those who fall on the introverted side of the spectrum, which is speaking up. It's speaking up. Whether it's at the podium, or it's in a group, it's in class, it's at a meeting, and want to zone in on really sort of the first tip. Connects with the long runway. Plan in advance. A lot of work I've done with more introverted students takes time, takes patience, of planning the contribution in advance. So let's talk about it. And again, it might not be tomorrow that you're going to participate in class. It might be next week. It might be next month. But let's work together and figure out when you're going to participate. And as an educator, I used to kind of queue up those quieter folks with kind of the preview. Okay, so this is what the lesson's going to be about. What do you think you want to talk about? And when can I bring you into the discussion? Do you want it to be, I suggest at the beginning, get it out of the way. Usually the first comments anchor a conversation. Maybe it's going to be after the active listening and you want me to call on you so you can summarize what's been said. But the critical thing is to plan in advance. It takes patience, but with practice and then over time, that stretch becomes more second nature, first nature, and just easier. But it has to happen. I often say to introverts too, asking questions. It's a form of participation, verbal participation. Again, that stretch can be quite difficult. And the third tip here, use body language to show engagement. I alluded to body language earlier. I was talking about kind of that active listening. And I want to say that for those who fall on the introverted side of the spectrum who have that natural proclivity to be listeners and observers, seems sometimes a little bit paradoxical, but that body language piece can be tricky, can be difficult. The turning inward, the reflecting, the thinking can sometimes not translate into the nodding and the smiling and the leaning forward and the signals that we give to one another to show that we're actively listening. And so a lot of the coaching, not a lot of it, well, a good chunk of it, can oftentimes be simply on what signals is your body emitting while you are deep in thought. Writing can be a way for educators to figure out whether the listening is really translating into that engagement. But actively teaching kind of the body language skills, 80% of what we communicate comes through our bodies, can also be really important. And that is a stretch. Frankly, it could be for any of us, for all of us, but particularly when we're thinking about kind of showing up and participating, verbally, I often say, if the comment is not quite there, show up with that body language, that sort of positive body language. And I want to emphasize, before I move on to the third of kind of the trio in this method, don't force, don't quit. The stretching, emphasize, can bring us great joy. Going back to what Brian Little has to say about exercising our free traits, go for it. So when we step outside of our comfort zones, and when we stretch, ideally in the service of our things we're really passionate about, meaningful, manageable, core personal projects, it's imperative, particularly for introverts, right, to take what Brian Little calls a restorative niche, a place that we can go to, a mental or physical place where we can go to replenish our energy. It is so critical for those who fall on the introverted side of the spectrum to have a quiet place to go to have a quiet place to go to. So when I think about actually all of my years as an educator, the place where I could replenish my energy, the only spot, was actually the ladies' room. That's where I used to have to go, because it was the expectations, the interaction, and the noise, and there were no quiet places. So one of the things I do when I work with educators in their schools, literally to think about where can you set up like quiet places, quiet spaces in your physical plan. And it can be really tricky, because they often just don't exist. Now at home, this can be, obviously any quiet corner. I would just say that it's really important when we think about the quiet spaces, that that space is not seen as a place where you go to be lonely, that there is a kind of a plenitude in solitude, and that it's obviously a critical recharging zone. Oftentimes, if there could be control over the light and the noise, kind of a calm sensory influences, could be the ideal restorative niche for an introvert who's had a really busy day at school. One of the things that I worked on in that first year of the Quiet Schools Network with, I think, several of the schools, but I want to focus in on one in particular, was a very simple concept of having a quiet, peaceful lunch. So cafeterias, often loud, noisy places where the expectation for social interaction is always there. And this was very simple. This was setting up a corner in the cafeteria with some butcher block paper. This was an elementary school. Colored pencils, glitter jars, calming, and the idea was kind of thrown out to the kids, 900 kids in the school, and it turns out 400 signed up for quiet lunch. And this was just, a corner of the cafeteria. It became so popular that staffing was a problem. This was a school that really didn't have the resources, and so that was actually their beautiful problem. Kids really needed a place to go where the expectation for socializing non-existent. Where being alone did not mean being lonely. Where educators weren't kind of running over, checking up on you, saying, "Are you okay? Do you need your friends around?" So that is just a very small, kind of quiet space, practical, sort of, I guess, suggestion that I often give to schools today. The companion of quiet spaces, quiet times, it is so critical to be able to look ahead the quieter temperament and say, okay, I know when I'm going to restore and recharge. As long as that self-awareness is there. Is it going to be Friday night when I know I don't have to go out? Is it going to be Saturday when we're not going to, all these potentially extracurricular family activities? I just need to know it's going to dramatically reduce kind of stress and anxiety for those who need the alone time to recharge. So this concept, very simple, of a managing energy calendar can be very useful. So looking ahead, this is when we're going to restore. And so I like to kind of pull out the candy metaphor here. As human beings, we see ourselves through the introversion-extroversion lens. We are always trying to find our sweet spot between calm and excitement. Kind of that. So what is your stimulation sweet spot? If you think about our kids, they oftentimes we don't have control over their schedules. One of the things I'm suggesting is that we can help them with restorative niches, something like a managing energy calendar, but it's also about developing that self-awareness. My body is like a battery that can get drained. And is my sweet spot on a Friday night? Is it going to be kind of hanging out reading, alone in solitude? Or do I really need, at the end of the day, I really want to go out, I need to be with people? So it's, again, finding that sweet spot between calm and excitement. So I mentioned that this concept of restoring ourselves is critical. And I wanted to end on a kind of a broader notion of restoring balance. I see this work as restoring balance in our cultures and in our environments. Restoring the balance between calm and excitement, deliberation and action. Because as I said earlier, our cultures are often permeated with some form of extrovert bias. Now that extrovert ideal. And I want to say here that there's no sort of one-size-fits-all extrovert ideal in any culture. And in schools, I often start by asking educators to think, so now that we kind of have a sense of what this extrovert ideal looks like, where does it manifest itself in your school culture? Oftentimes, most often, it shows up in the comment writing. And showed you those examples of sort of quiet, friendly comments. In that graded class participation, as we move towards a temperament inclusive school culture, we broaden, as I alluded to earlier, we broaden participation to think about engagement. We think of one-on-one forms of communication and social styles. We think of small groups, large groups. We think of listening as a form of engagement. We can assess body language. We can teach it and assess it, but we broaden notions of engagement. So it could also show up in thinking about that extrovert ideal and bringing that balance back. It could be in student government. It could be in the admissions process. It could be in the college process. But it's fundamentally a line of inquiry that I encourage educators to pursue. And it is often implicit and we don't even know it's there. It's like, calling an introvert shy and you don't even realize you've said it. So restoring that balance, and it can take, as any cultural shift can take, years. It can take years. But ultimately, I think if we work at it, we will restore the balance. And here I want to bring in kind of another form of balance, that we are really stronger together. And so if you take the yin-yang image here, introverts and extroverts together, dynamic duos, powerful mixed teams. We pay attention to the temperament mix of our teams, going back to Adam Grant again. Mixed temperament teams can outperform those that do not have this element of diversity. Why? The introverts bring this task focus, the extroverts bring the social focus. We get kind of the prudence, the deliberation, and then the action-oriented approach of the more extroverted personality style. And together, we can get results. We can maximize productivity and creativity of our teams. So, restoring balance, really where I'd like to end. And with that, we'll move into a few of your questions and thoughts. But before I do that, I want to make sure we bring in that I am true to my mission, which is to build in sort of a reflective pause, just maybe a minute, even before we move on to some of your questions and thoughts. A reflective moment, sometimes called a metacognitive moment, where you're thinking, okay, so what's my main takeaway? What is my question that I have unanswered? How can I kind of make meaning out of this experience that we've had just now? Is there a story I want to share? We ask students, you can pause at the beginning, the middle, and end of a lesson. And just have this reflective moment. It can be in writing and you can collect it. That could be another way of figuring out when your students are engaged. So, get true to the mission. I want to give you a reflective moment before I turn it over to some of your questions and thoughts. to you.
So first off, I want to say a big thank you to Heidi, because that was really good introduction tonight. Let's start talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
I apologize, I came in late and missed the earlier part of the talk, but as I listened to your approach, and especially your definition of an introvert, I am curious if you could speak to the overlap with some sort of that of anxiety disorder or anxious personality. How do you differentiate between an anxious individual versus an introverted individual?
So the anxiety is affiliated with shyness and the fear of social judgment. Right? So I'm not speaking up because I might be wrong. I might get it wrong. And introverts and extroverts alike can be shy and have that sense of anxiety. But with the quieter temperament, there's a fundamental, like the core, it has to do with your sensitivity to social and sensory input from the outside world. So it could really have nothing to do with anxiety, right? I am not speaking up right now because I prefer to think before I speak and I need some wait time and you're not giving it to me, or I am literally overstimulated. So these bright lights are coming and hitting my nervous system in a way that's making me fundamentally uncomfortable and overstimulated. So I'm going to have to go and take a restorative niche that has much dimmer lighting to recover and restore, my nervous system. So, that there could be overlap, and I do, but not necessarily. I do fundamentally believe that if we are not attentive as educators and caregivers to the sensitivity to stimulation of our introverted kids, this can lead to shyness. If you are told over and over again, come out of your shell, it can backfire. And then you actually become afraid to speak up. You're afraid of saying anything. And when I work with kind of older, we're talking high school, college age, quieter kids, there is that overlapping of introversion and shyness becomes more apparent when you kind of tease out the two. Which is also why that's calculated stretching, supporting scaffolding, the calculated stretching at a young age is so important. And something like the speaking up and providing that support can make all the difference down the road. So that anxiety doesn't emerge, because it's not really part of the equation. And you can understand yourself. Oh, I'm anxious here, but here I'm introverted, right? There's just too much stimulation.
I think that makes complete sense, although I can definitely see it being confusing from both angles. So if you have a teacher, even a parent-child relationship where they don't talk very much about feelings, if you can't get the child to verbalize kind of his internal or her internal experience, the phenotype that you're looking at can be very confusing, right? Whether it's anxiety or introversion. And if you have a very young child, they may not even understand or be able to
I agree. And then, I go back to like thinking about, your baby and their reactivity to, the sensory and social stimuli when they were at a very young age, 4 months of age. What happened when there were a lot of lights and noise and people around? Was there a lot of crying? So I think that's just one way we can kind of try and get a handle on it. When we think about our kids, but it's difficult.
Some questions on this one?
So I have a kid who is introverted, and she's literally quiet, and she speaks so softly that it's hard to even hear her. But if we say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you repeat it?" It's almost like she gets quieter because that attention just makes, I don't know, it shuts her down more. How do you help a kid stretch in that situation?
I would say that motto, don't force, don't quit. So trying to figure out kind of when to, give her that advice of raising the voice, when she's ready. Did you say she? You did, right? When she's ready, when she's not ready, but kind of working at it slowly over time and taking the long view. Unfortunately, there's no one.
So maybe practicing it not in that moment, or talking about it's almost like because she's using her voice, she's spoken, and then which for her is a lot.
Yeah.
And so then we say, "Oh, I can't hear you," then she shuts down.
Right.
So
Yeah. I'd say another time. And then something that feels like when the stakes are lower, and that episode is sort of forgotten. So you could, I don't know, a walk in nature, and you're just, you're talking to the birds, or just something where the environment's different, and there's not that kind of connection with that whatever moment it was, when there might have been the great effort just to speak up. It's kind of lowering the stakes. Yes.
I appreciated what you said about body language. Since a lot of us have older kids here, do you have any other kind of strategies or tools that we could work with them on that would help the rest of the world see their wonders and think less negatively about them and think that they're shy or lacking social skills or something like that? Just specific tools or strategies that maybe introverts can employ that we can help them with in order to have the world think a little, see who they are and what they have to bring to the situation. Does that make sense?
Well, I'd say it's kind of the whole package that I reviewed. I think there needs to be awareness of, what it means to be quieter. Those negative associations need to be reframed, right? So our brains don't go there, often make these mental associations. I think emphasizing the quiet strengths. And understanding that fundamental need to restore, and ultimately there's self-advocacy too. Down the road, if it's age appropriate. Owning my strengths. Here are my strengths. These are actually my strengths. But it takes a village. Right? It really takes the child and the kid having a kind of an understanding of the sensitivity to stimulation. It takes educators creating a classroom environment that honors different modalities of engagement. It doesn't, go right for quantity of speech. That takes a lot of work. And then it takes, parenting strategies. As we're discussing tonight, strategies that can really support things that could be stressful and anxiety provoking, like a stretch. So I don't have just one answer. I think it's a multi-pronged, solution.
I have a question about literature. Can you recommend any books on the nonfiction side that really address this topic, but are written targeted at young adults and adolescents? And the second question on literature, can you think of any nonfiction young adult novels that maybe showcase and highlight an introverted lead character, in a leadership role?
Yeah, how about if I send you a nice long list?
So you send me a list, I promise I'll get it out to everybody.
I got lower school, middle school, upper school.
Upper school.
I got some long lists for you.
Thanks. Hey, Shirley.
I just wanted, we'll go here and then here, okay?
Hi, so I'm a high school educator. I actually work here at Middle Atherton. And one other thing I want to address about if you do have an older child who might be an introvert, I laugh a lot. Like, I am a huge extrovert, and God gave me an introvert as my oldest so that I can learn to be better and be a better teacher at it too, right? But one of the things that older kids have access to that teachers appreciate are the nonverbal ways of communicating. So using email and planning and making appointments, oh my gosh, the teachers that is a joy to them, right? And introverts are much better at that. And I guarantee you that if an introvert can get on their computer, make an appointment, that teacher will honor that. And in fact, they will actually leave that space and say, even if it's just 5 minutes, right? I'm sorry, this is the child I have an appointment with now, right? So they don't need to fight for that time, not to mention it's a great executive functioning skill.
Thank you.
Right here, okay.
I just wondered, based on your experience with older kids and kids in college, have you seen any kind of anecdotal success with introverts being more comfortable in larger classroom environments so you don't feel the pressure in smaller, maybe little large classroom environments to constantly participate and contribute because that's a major part of the experience?
I'd say it depends. In terms of the college experience, it's not quite addressing your question, but I've seen, introverted kids really want to go to a smaller school with smaller classes, and it really is up to the teacher or the professor to, engage those different modalities. And I've also seen kind of the introverted child or college-bound adult, mini adult, really want those larger lecture halls where that expectation, for participation isn't quite as high. Although I feel like what I see more and more is that there are different modalities of kind of communication that are opened up. So even if you have the larger lecture hall, right, you have the smaller discussion group, or you have the online forum, and so there's verbal and there's written participation, engagement, that is kind of required, at various institutions. I guess, yeah, sometimes I'm more comfortable, in that lecture hall, and sometimes, well, I don't know. So I guess I could say it really depends in terms of the college background.